Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Aquarian Radio Network, and I'm your host, Janet Care Lessin, with Debra DeFranco and Karen Christine Patrick. And you're listening to an episode of Elephants in Our Rooms on aquarianradio.com. So we've got a lot of topics we're going to cover today. We just spoke to Debra DeFranco, and she's up in the Niagara Falls area, and she's got a report coming in that just happened today. So we're going to let her explain what's going on. So, Debra, you're live. Take it away. Tell us what's going on.
Okay. So I was comparing notes with my friend who was on the West Coast, and they had an earthquake this morning around 4:30 a.m. that was right over Southern California by the Los Angeles National Forest, and right after the earthquake, which didn't register on any of the Richter scale meters, by the way, so there was no alert sent out about the earthquake, and then there was a fire in the forest shortly afterwards. Now, around 6:30 this morning, when I woke up, there was a massive chemtrail, which I thought was Perseverance, and it was running, it looked from the north, somewhere in Canada, maybe farther away, all the way to the south, and it was running directly north to south, and it was dissipating in the north, so that's how I could tell what direction the chemtrail was coming from. But you couldn't see it dissipating in the south, and it looked like it had been in the sky for a while. Now, I don't know if the two are connected, but the only time I've ever seen a chemtrail like that before was on an Ancient Aliens episode where they showed a chemtrail that got generated from the South Pole to the North Pole in less than 2 minutes. So it's just got my spidey senses up, and we're sitting here trying to collect more data.
Wow. Okay, so what you're saying, so you've got Perseverance. So Perseverance was being launched today?
It was either, I think it was either yesterday or today. I thought it was this morning, but it was around 9. Or was it later?
I'm
going to
look that up real quick. Yeah. So Perseverance is the new craft that's going launches. No, let's see. I'm looking at launch of Perseverance.
But it launched out of Florida. And that chemtrail was going north to south. That's why I know it's not Perseverance.
Okay, so it's not Perseverance. Okay, so we won't go down that thread. Karen, do you have any information? You're in the New Mexico part of the world. Anything that you noticed there or picked up?
Nothing except that it's just so darn hot, so I haven't really been outside. And I've been, being in a nice, cool air conditioner and tracking other stories, including that the New York Times had been talking about, this whole time the military's been telling us ever since Roswell, New Mexico, that they are not studying aerial phenomenon, or what they call aerial phenomenon, which is UFOs, and now they're admitting that they are in fact studying it. So I can't get the New York Times article because I don't want to do the paywall, but the Baltimore Sun had a recap of it, and we can talk about that during the course of the show.
Okay, so you have the Baltimore. Let me look that one up. What's the name?
Well, if you want to get to it quick, you go to NYT UFO, and then it'll be like the first 8 things will be the New York Times article, and then there'll be the Baltimore Sun one, and that one doesn't have a paywall.
Was that where they were talking about the Tic Tac ship?
Yeah, it was
Is that what they called it?
Yeah, no longer in the shadows. Pentagon's UFO unit will make some findings public. So this is sort of a big deal in the sense of admitting that they have in fact been studying the UFO phenomenon when they have said for years that they weren't, and which if you've been around this topic a while, nobody believes that. And then they're now saying that they are using the Tic Tac incident, which was kind of well known. It has been followed by a number of ufology people. So a part of the UFO community is very excited because they're admitting that that's not might not be an Earth-based ship. The government is studying them on the basis of, and what was interesting is they're studying them or releasing the information on the basis that one of our enemies, as they would say, Russia and China, might have benefited from back engineering craft that has crashed. I mean, they've crashed all over the world, most notably Roswell, and that they back engineered some form of technology and might be testing that kind of technology over, up in our skies. And so they're admitting that this is a national security issue in that regard. And so a lot of people are excited they're at least admitting that much, because typically they don't. And then telling us that they're going to release more information is different from the normal mainstream methodology of talking about this. I just have my usual concerns about the motivation for why they're doing that at this time. I am kind of dubious, because I think that the entire discussion of it is couched in national security interest rather than the general sociological interest, and it also kind of is trying to validate that they want some kind of space. Well, we have a space force now, right? So my mind goes to, they want some money for the Space Force. Just like whenever they say that we have a small natural moon called Clutane, and they say, it's an asteroid, it's about to hit us, and it has pretty regular announcements that it's looping around again, and they call it an asteroid. So, digging in deep into these topics, you find out that there's kind of agendas all the way around, and so that's what my concern is what's the agenda here, because obviously lots and lots and lots of people have seen lots and lots of things, and maybe we may have even had a crash just now, and they're not going to study that? Really? I don't believe that. And then if they're saying something about it now, my question is why. So that would be my report.
Wow. So I'm trying to figure out where to take this show today. So we've got the sighting there in upstate, I guess where you are, New York.
Upstate
and it's coming
New York.
north to south. What do you think that is?
Yeah.
Well, if you were to speculate, why do they have these chemtrails that are so large that they go from, you said one was from the North Pole to the South Pole, and it happened in moments or seconds? How do you think that's possible? That's not human technology. That's not human technology.
No.
Not possible.
No. And they've never seen a chemtrail like that ever. And they caught it on film. I should have taken a photo of this. I was just so dumb because I just assumed it was Perseverance. Because that's the only thing I've seen that could ever create a chemtrail like that, right? Missiles and rocket ships.
Right. But I've never seen a rocket launch over here. I mean, is that where they launch? In northern?
Well,
it's going to be in Florida, right?
No,
it's not going to be.
They launched Perseverance out of Florida, out of Canaveral, I think, today.
Right.
So that means if that was the case, the chemtrail would have went south to north. And this wasn't. This was dissipating north to south.
Mhm.
Well, that's weird.
Very strange. So what do you think's going on? We have all this stuff. We've got the government talking about tic-tac. There's a lot of people that are saying they're going to do a false flag information. I was on the Revolution Radio chat, and they're all convinced that there's going to be some kind of false flag. They're going to, control humans like they haven't already. I think this is like what's been going on all along. We're totally controlled by them. We're not doing much of anything. We're just sitting out here spinning our wheels, working our little jobs, living our little lives, and then we get killed off between 50 and 100 years. Couple get to live over 100. And we're back in this recycling where we keep coming back, the life, death, rebirth. And we never can quite get our minds around it. Can't figure it out. That's my opinion. But you think they're really going to reveal something that isn't controlled? I don't think so, but that would be nice. So where are the good aliens in all this? It seems like this whole system is controlled by, I got into a white hat, black hat, or like people who talk about white hats, they think that they're the white hats. And it's like, wait a minute, your ideology is killing 150,000 people, so you're a white hat? I hate to see the black hats are like, right? It's like, come on. Where is the Win Pro? Go ahead.
I probably, just based on observation of how things work, I think we probably have 50 Shades of Gray hats, pretty much. I think it's mostly, this is one of my beefs with black hat, white hat argument is that, okay, so if you say, you get the question, are aliens good or bad? And I'm going, well, a corollary question to that is, are human beings good or bad as a race? And it's like, well, depends on the one you're dealing with, So I've always felt it's based on talking to many, 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 many experiencers who do talk to one. I'm one of them. I'm a contactee. Is that it is all very mixed up. But I think if you're trying to ferret out clues as to where humanity is in the process, are we being invited to chart our own destiny and to actually affect change towards the positive or not? See, so what are we able to do with it? So right now, everybody's all over the place depending on what either they've personally experienced in terms of information or what information stream they happen to be plugged into. One thing I would definitely urge people to do is to not get in the trap of only paying attention to just a few news sources or spokespeople or anything like that. Try to read a little bit more widely. And then, I probably had longer time than most people to look at the conspiratorial negative lane because my dad was a negative conspiracy guy. And, I'm literally grew up in a way that I didn't think that I would grow up. I'm a grandma now. I wouldn't have expected to become an adult literally by what I was hearing at home. So, the way I figured it is try to be as positive as you can up until the minute that the whole, the asteroid hits or something. I mean, you know what I'm saying? In other words, you have to kind of adopt a seeking for the positive intent in your own intention in your own mind, unless others proven otherwise. And that's not an easy thing, right?
Yeah, I agree. Because there's really we have little to no control over anything. I've been having these discussions, and it's just obvious to me after a certain point when you look at this information is that you can't really determine if any of it's true. You could very easily flip-flop it back and forth, like this article that Debra gave me and said, China and Russia have a plan to defeat America, and it's America's far left is carrying it out. And I misread it at first, and so did Debra, and we thought, no, it's America's far right is carrying it out. It doesn't make sense, because Putin's buddies with Trump, and, there's all these stories within stories within stories. And so, the fingers are being pointed. You're the demon. You're the villain. You're the evil one. You're the one that's trying to destroy the world. You. And nobody sees that they themselves are, the other side of the coin, right? So what do we do about this? What is the truth? And so people argue the truth. They get into this like, well, I know about Jesus, and then that's the truth. And I know about the deep state and the mega hats and what's the other thing they talk about? Deep state. They're going to clean up the child trafficking. And it's like, nobody really knows anything. These are all, I call it the conspiracy within the conspiracy within the conspiracy within the conspiracy. And so at one point you just kind of keep going up the levels, and when you say, well, actually both sides are kind of bullshit. Then you start getting some clarity about there's this paradigm that's just kept us so confused about what is real and what isn't, and where it's all kind of made up and it's a joint matrix, so to speak, like the movie. So what's real? So then when you get above it, you go, okay, now I can finally get real. But it's just a layer. Everything's a layer upon a layer. I don't think we're going to know. I don't even think we're going to know when we're dead. I think we're going to go on the other side and we're going to still be in.
I always assume we will.
Confusion.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think all we can do is decide to be good or bad. You know, does that hurt somebody else? Does that concept, that ideology, does that philosophy, does that action harm somebody else? And so I go into ahimsa. I'm here to do no harm. I may accidentally do something, and please forgive me in advance. I will correct my course and go down, and try it again, and keep doing it until I get to the point where there's a win for all. Not just Star Trek had the one for the all, and I reviewed that and went, oh, that's such bull crap. That's the Jesus Messiah story. We're going to have this person come down and save humanity at the sacrifice of their lives. And it's like, I don't think that's the end game. Once again, we have another Messiah. So, anyway, I'm just tossing that out there. Deborah, you're laughing. What do you think about all that?
No, I mean, I agree with you. That's why I'm laughing, because I completely agree. I just think people are gullible, right? I think we're living in a very complicated world, and it's very hard to keep up. It's moving at an extraordinary fast pace, and it keeps speeding up. And I think people want to live in their own bubble because we've been taught to live in this world of fear, right? And so it's safe in my bubble. It's safe in my bubble with Fox News, or it's safe in my bubble with CNN, whatever your fancy is, right? And I just want to listen to Democrats, or it's easier to just create this little small world for yourself and not deal with everything else out there because it can be scary. But I'm with Karen. I think people need to look at all news sources, right? Right wing, left wing, central, it doesn't matter, And then I asked the boss this, who is probably one of the smartest men I've ever met. And this was back when I was in my 20s, like 35 years ago. And I'm like, you hear all this crap out on TV and out in the media. I said, how do you decide what's true? And he gave me a great piece of advice. He goes, look at who the messenger is and look at their motivation.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah, of
I
course.
like that.
And their motivation right
money.
there, right? The motivation right there tells you, it gives you some ideas whether this is true or not, right? And at the time, his example was General Electric, and they owned NBC. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah.
And if you remember, the news coverage of NBC at that time was all pro-military because they were one of the largest defense contractors in the country. But when you looked at the news at the other channels, it was very different.
Sorry. Yeah. No, I agree with you. Right. Who benefits? Qui bono.
Right. Who benefits?
Right.
So let me answer part of it. I got an article, and then I'll pass it back to you. I just wanted to, because that's a good lead into this. So there's the hydroxychloroquine argument is out there, and I had a guest on because he thought it was absolutely positively, the way and the light, it's going to cure everything, blah, 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 and that the Democrats have an agenda for it and this and that. But there's an article from the Daily Cause, which I really like, and it says that the Wednesday morning Republicans are in the second day of a full-on blitz attempting to sell the idea that hydroxychloroquine is an effective treatment against COVID-19. That effort comes in the form of not just statements from Donald Trump, but tweets and emails from Republican candidates and a full court press from Fox News. But the article goes on to say, but the hydroxychloroquine story is not whether or not the drug is effective, and to be clear, it's not. The reason Republicans are supporting this fresh round of out-and-out lies about a treatment that is more harmful than is helpful, because it isn't because they're getting rich off the pills, but because they really, really need to convince people that it's safe to go back to work, and they need to have people send their kids back to school, because hydroxychloroquine school openings in the GOP's plan for COVID-19 are all a single story. It's a story of Republicans needing working class people to go out there and generate money for the wealthy. So we have been, since our creation, the working class people that go out there and generate money for the wealthy. I think it was Jeff Bezos made so many $1 billion in one day because while everybody's sitting at home and they can't get to stores. You know, Amazon has basically eliminated so much competition. All these places, Bezos and Zuckerberg, they eliminate competition. So we're stuck with one major source for our goods and services. And then, of course, they can set the prices and they get all the money and they become these trillionaires, not just billionaires, it's just mind-boggling how rich these people are getting because of COVID. So let me see where one of the best, the public school funding system where almost all the cost falls on property tax in local communities is one of the best tools the wealthy have ever had to externalize costs and ensure the continued presence of a low-cost worker class. The result of the current system of school funding is that poor communities end up paying a much higher tax rate while getting schools that provide inadequate opportunities for children, helping to lock us in a poverty cycle when this is by no means an accident. The next article, if you notice, Barron Trump School is not opening. It's the poor. And it's just the carrot being dangled in front of workers as they're forced back on their jobs. The children are forced back to go to school without an option. It's the promise that if they do get sick, there's something that can be done. Unfortunately, it's an absolute lie. So
yes, we
are being forced back out because we are basically the slaves. We're all slaves. Unless you've got over
and I believe
10 million or 20 million,
they have no intention of providing any more financial support to the unemployed.
Yeah, of course not.
I believe the Republicans are going to run us off a financial cliff trying to force people back to work. But the disconnect is the jobs aren't there. There aren't open jobs. There's no jobs to go get. We don't sit home by choice.
No.
So what's going to happen? We're going to
get
kicked out of our. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm there. It looks like it sounded like it died for a second. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to get kicked out of our homes because we can't pay the mortgage, we can't pay the rent. There's no provisions. They've got all these empty stores, empty malls, empty warehouse buildings, empty places where people could be housed out of the elements, out of the heat, out of the cold. You know, bathrooms where you can't survive in COVID if you're not keeping clean. And so it's absolute insanity, but when you go to the next level, the conspiracy within a conspiracy, it's intentional. Your results are made manifest, your intentions are made manifest by your results. We're looking at intentionality. They intend for us to die, and to die in large quantities. So I'm going to pass it on to somebody else. What in the world is behind that? Is this a depopulation bomb? Or are these the good aliens, the bad aliens?
No. Do you know what I think this is? I think you're watching the last bastions of white power trying to stay in power. And they know the people want them gone. They do not represent the majority of this country.
Oh, yeah.
There was a time. Yeah, sorry, Karen, go.
No, you're right. I think it is a last gasp of an ideology that got its way, and now is getting the results. We're all getting the results of their intention. And it's, if these are people that have lived in their own bubbles and believe their ideology and really had no interest in listening to anyone else's point of view, and so they got their way, and then they got their perfect patsy president who will sign anything they give them. And I can look from the long ball of having what, my parents were Republicans. They were stumping for Ronald Reagan for governor. That's how far back my family history goes with this. And they started talking about, they instituted supply-side economics. I mean, I remember that. And this supply-side economics is not capitalism. It does not share the wealth and having flow in the economy. It's give the rich money, give the rich money, give the rich money, and somehow it's supposed to trickle down. And not only is it not trickling down, at this juncture of this many years later, but they don't even know how to make it trickle down, except that you go get your jobby job, and so they're running on the same rhetoric that they have while the whole machine is breaking down and gears are flying out of it. Kind of like a cartoon, smoke's flying out of it and the springs are coming out of it. Okay, we're at the end of an ideology that wasn't real. It wasn't real to the way people really are or who people really are. The definitions of what a person in minority groups and a woman and a female in patriarchal, extreme, ultra-conservatism, it's like that's not real. It's not a real viewpoint of people in life, and therefore they don't have a real view of the economy and how it affects people. So their ideas are definitely running out of steam. And there are new ideas waiting in the wings. It's just that I'm watched the Andrew Yang campaign about the basic income. There are countries now that have one, but not the United States, and they're not having the same sets of issues. If you're going to restart the economy, you sort of got to give the players some monopoly chips to do it with, and there is no monopoly chip. So even if COVID disappeared tomorrow, we would still have a very hard time going back to whatever we thought normal should be. Just technically, they know how to give money at the top, but it never trickles down, and they don't know how to give money at the bottom, and refuse to. And so I'm sitting here going, they're going to run it right off the fiscal cliff. It just seems to be the choice. And those of us, there's that level of poverty, the GDP dropping, plummeting in one quarter more statistically than the Great Depression. That is
32.9%.
Oh, that's the exact, like 1/3 of the economy roughly was what happened in the Great Depression. Yeah. So, it's very obvious certain things need to happen. And on top of everything else, well, nobody's noticing because I'm noticing because I'm a technological person, is this going to accelerate technological unemployment. So a lot of people lost their jobs. They're not going to ever have one again because those jobs are going to become automated, because that is one of the ways to build, to protect supply chains. Bezos and some of those guys can, write checks all day to buy a robot. So we've got to come up with a different economic structure. I mean, this is a total Etch-a-Sketch. This is shaking up everything that we ever thought we knew. And it's already done. It's not like it's gonna. It's already done. It's already over with. It's just going to be the echoes of this thing and then how to respond to it. And I just don't see the United States government really responding to it pretty much at all as far as the reality for the average person.
You have something you want to say, Deborah? Otherwise, I'm going to go back to this article you sent me because it's kind of got some interesting points.
No, go finish the article.
Okay.
Because I'm right on point with Karen.
Right. So
that's why I like you, Deborah.
The whole, so one of the things they're using to divide and conquer, and we don't know who they are. They could be the Anunnaki, they could be the Illuminati, they could be the Chinese, the Russian. I mean, there's a they that apparently wants to see the United States destroyed. And this article thinks it's the left, and I think it's the right, and I think it's Trump because he's a Nazi, and the Nazis came here and they kind of set up the United States after World War II, but now maybe they're shifting the seat of power. They've been shifting, whoever they are, the mystery they've been shifting the seat of power since going back to the Anunnaki. One of their first seats of power that they established after Sodom and Gomorrah was Inanna's had a son named Aeneas, and he fought at Troy, but then his children, the twins Romulus and Remus, went in to establish Rome, and then that seemed to be the seat of power for a long time. And then they marched up through to the UK, and apparently that's where Enki had gone with his people, up to Ireland and England and Scotland and Wales, and they came around the year 1000, and they conquered the people. They built roads. You can still see the roads of Romans. And then apparently they left, but they established, I guess, a colony and inbred with the people there. So now it was, Rome would conquer and just absorb everybody they conquered. You could all become citizens of Rome if you pledged your loyalty to them. So then, we have the kingships and we're down to the modern era. They still have the monarchy in the 1776. Around then, they had sent the colonies over, and then they shifted the seat of power to the United States. So we're still in the seat of power being in the United States right now. But apparently, whoever is really the puppet master, and of course all the presidents and the royals and the priests and whatever, those are all the puppets, and then underneath were the pawns. So they're shifting it. It looks like China and Russia are coordinating their efforts to take out the United States. And so what they're doing is they're relying on us to, they have hopes on dividing Americans, on pitting us against each other as a means of breaking a unified national will and rendering us dispirited, unable or unwilling to respond to their future hegemonies. And disinformation campaigns accentuate America's faults historically have been a favorite strategy, particularly by Russia. So Russia resents the United States because we managed to divide them. They were the USSR, the United Soviet Socialist Republic. And then we divided them, their economy failed, and so they've been wanting to get back ever since. And then, of course, China came in. I had one of my whistleblowers said that he visited with them 35 years ago, Jinping, whatever his name is, he said that, the Chinese just have a strategy, they're going to take us out because they have nuclear powers. And then my whistleblower said, well, why don't you just make us your customers? So they decided to make us customers, but now we have a current administration. Trump is saying we're going to not buy from Russia anymore. So there's this polarity. But I think they're all united at the top, kind of like Orwellian 1984, when they had a fictitious 3 countries, and I forget what they were called, Oceania, whatever. But now the modern interpretation of 1984 is Russia, China, and the United States. And then, of course, each faction has their allies. I think that the whole game is that we're continually in this war state, but the agenda is to just keep humanity locked down in poverty, struggle, confusion, not able to figure it out because they never figure out who the puppet masters are, pulling the strings, and so we never really achieve equality or figure out what to do to move past a struggle, base shock or struggle reality that we get to live in our little short lives that are 50 to 100 years. and then we're dead, we're back in life again, and we're in diapers, right? And each generation, there's less and less liberties. And even if we have a period like the last 50 to 100 years that the three of us were fortunate to be born in with the illusion that we have freedom, it's all just an illusion, and liberties are given and taken in any given lifetime, and so we go round and round and round. I just wanted to put that back to you, ladies. So, of course, the polarity demons are the fascists and the anti-fa, which just means anti-fascist. And for those who don't remember history, so we're doomed to repeat it, the fascists were the Nazis, and we did,
and the
for
Italians.
those who remember it, and the Italians, and we fought what was called World War II. And so when I was a little girl, I had to talk and hold and be the force for my full-grown PTSD father, who had, spent 4 years on the front in Italy fighting Mussolini. He was part of the troops that freed the concentration camps. And of course, there's people saying, "Oh, that was a fake thing. Never know." No, my dad was there, told me what happened, traumatized by it, and so here we are. Like, I guess I'm a grandmother. So by the time the generation that was created, the baby boomers are grandparents, this new generation doesn't remember what World War II was about. And it's kind of appalling because there's people in Walmart wearing masks with swastikas on them. I'll pass the talking stick. Thank you. Whoever wants to pick it up.
Well, okay, so yeah, we're repeating cycles, but I've tried to, based on the fact that I thought we were all toast back in the, duck and cover days of the 60s when I grew up, and I thought, okay, that's it. And it's like, so life circumstances, when it isn't it, and we'll never know who they are, is, I began to look for what is a change, what is any kind of alteration in the normal cycle, which I think this is the labyrinth. I call it the labyrinth of despair, where we're running around kind of like inside a Borg cube or something. And just as you were talking, I was thinking about how much the Romans and the Borg were an awful lot alike. We will assimilate you, Spartacus. And what is going to be different? So if you have a repeating cycle, it's in a static dynamic. In other words, it's always going to happen like that. It's always going to be that same cycle. And the only way that a cycle can change, particularly if it's like a biological cycle, is a new set of circumstances, or in the energetic sense, new information has to come in. And so if I were an alien species trying to help the poor humans on planet Earth, I'd be trying to get different information to us. Okay, so we're still going to do the same reaction. We're still going to do the bilateral or trilateral cha-cha, of reactivism. Most of the time we're not activists, we're reactivists. We're acting on something that happens. And in my communications with my particular guides, they said this, and I was stuck in my mind. The reactor is the slave to the actor. So in that sort of problem, reaction, solution cycle, if they can get you to react in the same energy that they act, then now you're spinning in their energy, dance. But if you take a minute and don't react, but sort it out and observe and respond, then you have a different type of response. And so I try not to, when things get polarized, I know I'm kind of like watching the ping pong. I'm going to step out, because not that I don't lean one particular way or another, I'm not interested in what they have to say, but it's like, if we're going this or that or this or that, now I know we're in a pendulum. Now I know we're in something that is a cycle, two ends of a cycle. And what I think is interesting is that even though we're having, the same old kind of reactive type thing going on, we also have different information. So look for the third thing, the fourth thing, the fifth idea. Look for other things out that are something else than the locked horns kind of this or that. And so that's why I became interested, not just personally, but on an exopolitical response to what the, you guys will hear it, I'll talk about it every single time, basic income movement, okay,
right,
is because it is a different viewpoint. It's a different way. It first starts out with that everyone deserves, if you're going to have capitalism, everybody deserves some money or everyone deserves to be supported. In the either or conflict that's going on, that's not always clear who deserves to be supported or not. They got to be deserving. It's merit based a lot of the time, and that's a new idea because that can be built on in the sense that not only should everyone be supported and protected and made able to be stable, but also that the planet does too, and all living things. We're mitigating against the very systems that we survive on here on spaceship Earth. So I think there's interesting to me looking at the edges and looking at different arguments in the either or. There are some ideas on the table there that would change the game and change the discussion. And I really wish that the two major sides politically would compete on who could help humans the best. That would be great.
That would be lovely.
Yeah, right. Like, what can we turn this competition thing in the favor of everybody instead of heads I win, tails you lose.
Right. So they're not doing it though. That would be logic. If this was the Star Trekian world, they would be having council meetings going, how can we help humanity? How can we help the Martians? How can we help the society but we're not living in that. We're living in this. How can we, divide and conquer, keep them divided, keep them scrambling. Like when we were children of the 60s, they had a thing. Some of you young listeners are going to go, what? They had what? Where we were told, we're going to get nuked and you need to get under your desk at school.
Yes, but that's going to help.
Like that. But we were all terrified because, now I don't know if they did this in your school, but in my school, they had these drills that the incoming missiles, and then they had the basement, which had windows, right? But there wasn't a secure bomb shelter. The basement had windows at the top of the room, right? And so there was light going into the basement at the school. And on the outside, they had the sign for the bomb shelter. Like, they're going to launch us all down to this basement with no food or water, no preparation for anything, like if we're going to be in there for weeks. They were going to launch us walk us all down into the basement where we would never see our parents again and wait for the bomb to hit. And then I'm thinking back at it, it's like, what? And this is what they did coast to coast in America in the 50s and 60s. So it makes you wonder, this whole propaganda bullshit where we're always in base shock or fear reaction for our lives, this is going back since the beginning. World War II, I'm sure it went back to previous generations. They were really facing it in my parents' generation. I have a friend that was born when the bombs were falling on London. They were getting bombed, literally, but they weren't like nuclear. They were just enough to blow up the building you were in or the one next to you. So this is a horrible place. I'm sorry. Earth is horrible. Very few generations escape unscathed. We're all traumatized. And, if it isn't COVID, it's Spanish flu. And these flus, that's the next other topic, these flus have been, and viruses and plagues have been launched against us since the Anunnaki created humanity. And the Anunnaki took humanity and divided it into their sides. So the gods had their own little armies, and they, had these different populations. And so sometimes when the humanity, there were too many of them, they just unleashed their variation on bug spray. The Anunnaki have total immunity to any of these diseases. They can breathe it in all day, and they'll never get sick or die or have any side effects. But they would go to the fields in the Dark Ages with the Grim Reapers, the guys in the uniform. That's why we have the image of the Grim Reapers. They would spray the fields and outside of town, and by the next day, the whole town was fighting the plague. So that's why I wear a mask, because we have a long history of these diseases that wipe out mass parts of the population. Not sure if it's blood type or genetics or what are the factors where one person will die and another person lives. But, we've been dying from diseases all along. And some of them were intentionally inflicted upon us. And I think the Spanish flu, which was in conjunction with World War I, is just like what we have now, COVID. And COVID, I think, has been tested before. We've had a number of years where there were these horrendous flus, and they called them SARS, and what were they called? The bird flu, all these flus. Those were biochemical weapons. Some have been here all along. Some have been revived. Some are dug up because the polar caps are melting and they're burning down Brazilian forests. Those things would lay dormant, and they get activated. So, okay, I talked enough. The next person.
Well, I think the entire Republican platform is based on fear. They try to scare the crap out of people. They've got all their supporters convinced that our country is just going to implode and it's just going to turn into this violent place if the Democrats get elected. And you know what's so weird? If you go back and look at history of both parties, whenever the Republicans are in charge, there's always financial problems. They give the country away to their cronies. There's always wars and financial problems. Anytime the Democrats are in charge, there's always financial success for everybody. And
right.
so
and
I'm starting to wonder if the entire party is just run by narcissists.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and that's something I wanted to do a show on. I need to study that more. What makes a narcissist? What makes a sociopath? What makes a psychopath? Why are these the people we vote for? We vote for these politicians that have these characteristics and qualities. And is that because the people who are voting for them are narcissistic as well, and that their leaders get to act out what they would like to do? It's like a projection. Oh, here comes Trump. He's acting out what we want to do. And then they make him their Messiah. He's their current Jesus. And he's going to come in and drain the swamp and clean things up and get the deep state. There's going to be arrests and all these child traffickers. Well, meanwhile there's Trump with the pictures of the underage girls, and the Epstein, and that's we have real photos. But I'm not saying that the Clintons work there as well. Maybe they just all go to the same parties and they all have sex with young people, and then they have something on each other. So if you don't comply with the good old boys in the club, we're gonna turn you in, because I don't think Epstein's dead. I think he's somewhere he's still having parties, in my opinion. Okay, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, I feel like the whole system was built for narcissists, for them. Yep. This is a psychopathic, we're Disneyland for psychopaths and narcissists. And that was something I first noticed in the cult that I grew up in, the religious patriarchal cult that I grew up in, is that it just seemed to be tailor-made for the narcissist, and then we had a very, very serious pedophilia and wife-beating and child abuse sets of problems in the church, and if any of the victims said anything, then, that couldn't possibly be that man. He's the song leader, he's great, or he's the preacher, he's wonderful. Why would you lie about that? And, impugn all kinds of, motives. And it was like I look around, and at this point, I'm very fortunately involved in a support group, a couple of support groups for what I went through. And this is the comment, when I left alone. I left like, this is not for me, right? And then now that we're all comparing notes, we're all realizing this narcissistic, psychopathic, patriarchal thing that was common in many, many people's households and where they were at, and how they went through some kind of, abuse scenario, and there was no way that they were ever going to be, not only within their family, allowed to talk about it, but definitely not the community, the greater community there. And so I started kind of going through the bad eggs, in my mind that I had known about, and every single one of them was at least narcissistic, if not some kind of psychopath or sociopath. So they call that a narcopath. And I think we are getting a lesson in that. And that is, our president is he's easy for me to read because he's a narcissistic sociopsychopath. His denial of any responsibility and the pattern of his denial language about, knowing perfectly well something and saying, I don't know that thing. Just the actual words that he chooses to use. And I think that there's only one thing you get from a narcopath. There is only one thing that you ever get. And if you never hear anything else I ever say again, it's this, is betrayal. And that's not just the people that's their enemies, it's also the people that they follow, because they know they're lying all the time. And if you believe their lie, they think you're stupid, and they don't care about whether you lost your job. And they don't care about any of those things. And so this is apparently, as I, kind of looked into the abuse issues and stuff and talked to other survivors, that personality type comes out again and again and again. And it's, at the time you're experiencing one or two or five of those, you don't know what that is that they're doing. You don't know what gaslighting is. You don't know what, verbal abuse necessarily is, because they turn it back around on you. That's what gaslighting is. It's all in your head, right? And
make you think you're crazy.
Right, but they're doing that on a grand scale now, and people are at the point they don't quite know what they're dealing with, but they know there's something wrong, but they can't quite put their finger on it. They're kind of where people like me were a number of years ago, coming into discovery of, one, what this kind of person is, and number two, why we need to be educated and never have one of those people holding the purse strings or our lives in their hands, ever, because it's not good. You're only going to get betrayal, including the people that follow as well. They're not going to be spared.
I'm reading.
I absolutely agree with you.
I'm reading Mary Trump's book. I'm saying that I'm reading Mary Trump's book, and what happened is very interesting on page 24. So Mary had 5 children. Mary Trump was Donald's mother, and Fred was the father. So here's what Mary Trump the second, because Mary Trump, the previous generation was Trump's. So Mary Trump was named after her grandmother, right? So Fred Trump seemed to have no emotional needs at all. In fact, he was a high-functioning sociopath. Although uncommon, sociopathy is not rare, afflicting as much as 3% of the population. 75% of those diagnosed are men. Symptoms of sociopathy include a lack of empathy, a facility for lying, an indifference to right and wrong, abusive behavior, and a lack of interest in the rights of others. Having a sociopath as a parent, especially if there's no one else around to mitigate the effects, all but guarantees severe disruption in how children understand themselves, regulate their emotions, and engage in the world. So Mary said, my grandmother was ill-equipped to deal with the problems caused in her marriage by Fred's callousness, indifference, and controlling behaviors. Fred's lack of real human feelings, his rigidity as a parent and as a husband, and his sexist belief in a woman's innate inferiority likely left her feeling unsupported. So what happened, Mary had two children back to back, and there's a big gap between the first batch and the second batch, and she had 5 children. When she gave birth, she had to be rushed to the hospital, had 3 surgeries. And so the youngest, Donald and Robert, would have been in the most precarious position because of Fred's lack of interest. So Mary was sick, unable to parent the children. Fred had a total lack of interest. And all behavior exhibited by infants and toddlers is a form of attachment behavior which seeks a positive, comforting response from the caregiver, like a smile. So this is a smile, tears to prompt a hug. Even under normal circumstances, Fred would have considered any expression of that kind of an annoyance. But Donald and Robert were likely even needier because they missed their mother and they were actively distressed by her absence. The greater their distress, however, the more Fred rebuffed him. He did not like to have the man afraid of him. And the annoyance provoked by his children's neediness set up a dangerous tension in the Trump household. That were biologically designed to trigger, by engaging in behaviors that were biologically designed to trigger soothing, comforting responses from the parents, the little boys instead provoked their father's anger or indifference when they were most vulnerable. For Donald and Robert, needy became equated with humiliation, despair, and helplessness. Because Fred didn't want to be disturbed when he was home, it worked in his favor if his children learned one way or another not to need anything. So these children, Donald, he wasn't parented properly. But that's what created a sociopath. And his book goes on and on, just explains how he isolated the children so they couldn't even find comfort in each other. So, Karen, when you had this type of upbringing, were you able to engage with your siblings, or were you pretty isolated with your thoughts?
Oh, no.
Trying to figure out what's going on.
Okay, so to give you an idea where the patriarchy level of the group was that there was first of all, a pitting the father parent against the mother parent, and treated them as if they were just another kid that they have to discipline. So there was always a disapproval of the female, and I guess the hierarchy of the family was the papa, and then the mama was not second. The first male child was, which happened to be my brother, who was younger than me. So there was sort of this fostering of the males and fostering, but it wasn't, I don't think, very positive, but I can't speak to it. I just know for the girls, we were supposed to, we were following our Stepford Wife programming where we were supposed to be, trained up to be mothers and wives, and really not very much else. My relationship with my father was very strained as a result of that. And my dad was a one-way kind of person, so if there was an issue or he wanted to talk to me, it was he wanted to tell me something. I learned relatively early it wasn't that he wanted to talk to me as a person. And the older I got, the more like a young woman that I got, the more kind of rejection that I felt. But it was more like coming out of your mind to your mouth.
And for some reason, it's kind of breaking up for me. I'm not sure what's going on.
Deborah,
I
can't hear her either.
Karen?
No, I can't hear her either.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. We'll come back to you in just a minute. Let's circle around. So, Deborah, we don't know how you were raised. But did you have the ideal parents that we all longed for but never got?
No. I had a father that was a narcissist, was completely disengaged, and I had a mother that was a control freak. I believe she had OCD, and it was an awful household to live in. My mother did not know how to show love. All she knew how to show was anger, and it was almost as if my mother was born angry. And what was so disturbing is when other people would come around us, her personality completely changed. She acted like she was so sweet and nice. And the same thing for my father. Outside of our house, everybody thought my father was just the greatest guy. But inside of our house, my father was horrible. He didn't care anything about us kids. He didn't engage with us. He only cared about my brothers. And he had no interest in me whatsoever. And my brothers were always chosen over me, no matter what it was. My mother raised me to believe that I was equal. But my father did not act like that. My father actually apologized for it on his deathbed. You know, he was very paternalistic, very traditional Italian, did not treat his family well, treated his friends better than he treated his family. And my mother was not capable of showing any kind of love. So we were constantly being yelled at or screamed at or beat. Like the way my mother disciplined us is considered child abuse now.
Wow.
And we were constantly thrown out of the house for not washing the dishes or not picking up the house. And, you know, every Saturday, the entire day was spent doing chores. And then she would get infuriated. We were little kids. Then it would get messy right afterwards. And she would call us derogatory names, like we were little wops. And she used to always tell us she couldn't wait till we grew up and went away. So when Sasha made that commentary, I asked him what created emotionally dysfunctional people. I never understood because I was a little psychopath when I was younger. And I did all kinds of horrible things. And I never understood how I could be that person then and be this person now, because I am nothing like the person I was when I was a teenager. Nothing. Like people who see me now are surprised I'm even alive, that I made it past 18. I'm surprised I made it past 18.
So what we find with that is that there's usually some kind of, something turns it around for you. There's some kind of love. You get some kind of love somewhere that keeps you from going down into total sociopath. There wasn't anybody, a grandmother, a pet. Did you have a pet that you loved?
I had a grandmother. I had one grandmother. My Italian grandmother hated me. It was my mother's mother. She was like my mother. That was the only place I found kindness. And when I was a teenager, one of my boyfriend's mothers took me in, and she was always kind and good to me. And those were probably the only two females that showed me any kindness or love. And I was severely depressed. They thought I was suicidal, but I wasn't. But I wanted passive suicide. Like I wished a car would hit me and take me off the earth, right? But I would never take my own life, that kind of thing, right? And I realized I left home at 13, and at one point when I was living out on the streets, I realized no one cared about me except me. And at that point, and right after that is when I came into contact with my boyfriend. I think I was 15 when I came into contact with that boyfriend, and his mother and his family took me in. So I stayed with them probably from the time I was 15 until I was 17, off and on. And from 13 to 15, my mother and I didn't talk at all. Like we had no relationship, zero relationship. And I even ended up in juvenile hall. And they asked me if I wanted to go home, and I was like, nope. And as much as being locked up bothered me and hurt me and was so emotionally disturbing, being at home was worse. So, you know, I was sitting there in front of the judge, and he goes, do you want to go home? And I'm like, no. And he looked at my mom, and she goes, do you want her back? She was like, no. And he's like, you two need to get it together. Because the judge was determined not to put me into the system. But she let me come home, but I left shortly after that. My mother and I have been at war my entire life. And I'm now at the point where I have nothing to do with her. I've tried to establish a relationship, and I know that I'm the one that has to make the adjustments because my mother is who she is, and she's not going to change. And so I went home at the beginning of the year to her house to help take care of her because she was losing her eyesight and she was having surgery. And after it was all over with, she threw me out.
Oh, my God.
My brother and I had gotten into it. I had sent an email to all my family members, and let me say this for those who don't know me. I am the mother of children and grandchildren of color. My entire family, except for my mother, supports Trump. And I have cut my family off because that tells me what you really think, right? And you support policies that hurt my children and grandchildren. So absolutely, as much as I don't like politics to come between me and my family, I cannot sit in a room with my family anymore. And so I had sent an email to my brother not too long before my mother had kicked me out, sent it to my entire family. And this was after that article had come out about Trump and how he treated the generals and called them a bunch of crybabies and just treated the military so poorly. And, you know, my brother and my son-in-law are both in the military. And I sent an email to my family, and I'm like, to any of you that support this president, I'm like, shame on you. And I didn't say anything else. And, you know, some laughed it off, but my one brother was intent on kicking me out of the family. He's like, you're forbidden from coming around me and my kids and this and that. You're a bad influence, and said all these horrible things. And while I was with my mom taking care of her, he decided to come visit her. And I begged her. She said she was going to stay out of it. And I begged her because when my brother started sending me nasty emails, my response back to him was, there it goes, the angry white male privilege. You think you're better than me, right? And you think you sit in a position where you can just discard me. And I'm like, that's not going to happen. And so my mother said she was going to stay out of it. And so my brother and his wife and kids decided to come and visit while I was there. And I asked her not to let that happen. I'm like, neither me or him are the kind of people to be quiet. And you know what's going to happen if we're under the same roof. So why would you even encourage that? And, you know, we had a Mexican standoff for a few days, right? And then she just went off on me after the third day. And she's like, you're not coming in between me and my son. And I go, there it goes. You're choosing your sons over me. And that is how my entire family has treated me my whole life. And I'm like, you know what? She goes, you need to get out of here. I'm like, all right. I'm like, you told me you wouldn't take sides, and here you are. And I'm like, just give me an hour. I'll have my stuff packed, and I'll be gone. And she kept trying to come out there and argue with me, and I wouldn't engage. And I just made it up in my mind, this is the last time you ever get to throw me out of my house. I drove across country to take care of you, and now you're going to throw me out of the house? And I'm like, I will never come back here again. And I packed my car, and I left, and I haven't spoken to my mother since. And I have no intention of having a relationship with my mother. And I feel bad because I know, you know, her life, you know, she maybe has 10, 15 years, if we're lucky, left on this earth. And I hate that she will probably die without us speaking. But I've spent 57 years trying to have a relationship with my family. But the expectation is that I'm supposed to change, and I'm not going to. And there's nothing wrong with who I am. I may not fit your expectations or behave up to your expectations, and I'm never going to. So if you're not going to get over this and stop this, then I'm going to put an end to this war. And I'm just not going to be a part of this family because it's obvious I'm no longer welcome. And I haven't spoken to any of my family since.
Oh, I really feel for you. You know, but that's a hard lesson. Love and involvement are two different things. Just because you're born to each other, you know, you're in a family that you're all born to each other, does not mean that you have to tolerate toxic relationships. And especially since there's something that happened with Trump being elected because of his sociopathic upbringing, that it got translated onto the United States, and we've seen so many families that are broken apart, and that sociopathic aspect of individuals and families has come to the forefront. And this is a common story. I know it's very painful, although, our true families are those people who love us because of who we are and not, love out of sense of obligation, which really isn't love. It's just like we were born to each other. So I have a major disconnect with my brother. I've managed to work it out with my sister. My parents were absentee parents. My mother was very abusive. She acted out on me about 8 times, and she strangled me one time. She pushed me down a flight of steps. She threw me off the balcony. My dad caught me. I mean, there's just so much stuff, and I've had to work through it therapeutically. Like, why is it that this person that gave birth to me just rejected me? It's like a dog that rejects a puppy. I was just rejected since I was born, and my mother kept trying to kill me. Then they ended up medicating her. My dad, who had PTSD from World War II, just kind of sat there and didn't do anything. But something happened with Star Trek. my life turned around with Star Trek. In the summer of '66, my mother had to have a hysterectomy, so she got rushed to the hospital, and she had to go through a couple surgeries. And then Star Trek was premiering. So I asked my dad, I said, I really want to see it in color. And I had an old black and white TV, and I said, would you get me a color TV so I can see Star Trek? Because they had some, commercials promoting it all summer. And so my dad decided to be my friend and come out of his funk and pay attention to me. So that's, I think, what saved me. But I think if we don't have something or somebody somewhere to show us love, we all end up being, on the scale between narcissists and total psychopaths that might be murderous. This death of 150,000 people and counting is it is Trump's fault. It's all his fault. This could have been prevented. There are other countries in the world that acted differently, and no one has the numbers like the United States. This is because we didn't elect him, because we had a man who's very, very, very dangerous take over the country, and now he's saying, I don't have to leave. Let's not have an election. He's not even going to bother to have an election that he could lose. He's just somehow manipulating it that we won't have an election. I'm not sure what the grand plan is, but I think somebody smarter than Trump, we talked about the puppet master, is pulling the strings, and it's something on the level of Orwell's 1984. So we're going to be very lucky in the United States if we end up even having an election. They're trying to dismantle the post office so we can't mail in our votes. We've managed to have elections despite civil wars and World Wars I and II, but there's something about right now that I don't know. Okay, back to you, Karen. Let's see if your mic's working. Are you there, Karen? Oh,
you might have to call her back, dial her back in.
No,
Hello?
She called back in. I looked and she was muted. Sorry, I'm talking to you, Karen, and you're muted. So I went back to the board. Okay, so Karen, I don't know what you heard or missed, but we were talking about our horrendous childhood. We were all commiserating. We had a saving grace, somebody who loved you.
Yeah.
Who loved you, Karen?
It's funny because you talked about
that you became
Star
a
Trek.
being. Yeah.
You
said
Star
Go
Trek.
ahead.
I got Star Trek too because that was the one thing I liked about it. I was quite young when it happened. I was 6 on the cusp of 7, and or maybe 7 on the cusp of 8. I'm not sure, but it was like the thing that got me was the positive future concept. Because from the far right wing upbringing I had, it was either going to be that we all get hit by the bomb, or we're all going to have, the commies and destroy our country. And then when you went to church, they talked about Armageddon. So it's kind of like, or the rapture, or the Gabriel's going to toot, and the coming is going to, and we're all going to scoot. That was what they said. Yeah. So the rapture or something to that effect, and it just was so demoralizing
to me. I remember sitting one time when I kind of just, part of when I started to check out a church was when they started talking about the Fox Book of Martyrs and how all the martyrs back in the Roman times had all kinds of horrible things happen to them, and just, writing a Sunday sermon. There you go. And it was like, that was like, we're coming up with this space race. We're going to have these rockets. Don't get me started on NASA. But, yeah, we're going to have these rockets. We're going to go to the moon. How exciting that is. And I plugged into, and I kind of had to be my own comforter. I had to be the one that looked outside my immediate circumstances to find mentoring, something to hang on to, something to look forward to. So being a real nerdy chick, I really glommed onto Star Trek too, because it had such a ultimately positive message and hope for humanity that I just wasn't getting anywhere else. And every time I think of Star Trek, I think of you, Janet, because everybody says we want to have a Star Trekian world. I mean, that was the early iterations of Trek. We're not so much about Star Wars, it was still Star Trek. Was how we will be confronted with all these different kinds of sentient species, and how are we going to have the kind of mindset that's ready to engage with them. But one of the things they had on that show was the prime directive that the ETs couldn't interfere with another species. I mean, they couldn't, the Federation couldn't interfere in another planet the way it's been being run. It needed to be just observed and slightly interacted with, but not enough to throw them off. If the Federation had more technology than the people on the planet, and the funny thing about that was, if you watch those shows, is Captain Kirk tossed that out a lot whenever he felt it was time. Like if he saw a planet and saw that they were locked in a cycle that they couldn't get out of, then like if they were run by a computer, as that was all logic, or if they were constantly at war or whatever, he'd try to throw a wrench into the monkey works there. And it's like, I think that's going to happen here. I do. Because
cool.
Yeah, because, and I think it's already happening, but we need to know what we're looking at. And humanity's story is being yelled out by humanity right at the moment, and not really looking at how new information is coming in. We ostensibly are talking on technology that came out of the fact that it's possible that the technology that underlies our hardware in particular was possibly gotten from crashed craft that were back engineered. And that's how we got all the various kinds of sub-technology that we have in our little tiny phones that have little tiny computers in them, And then another part of this is the idea that we can even treat each other with anything egalitarian. That's a really unusual concept. Most of societies are completely steeped in hierarchical ways of thinking. Even the idea that we might be free, independent people that can have their freedom, and everyone's saying, I want to have freedom from, not also caring about the social good is not going to work. I think that we're being guided in that regard. And some of it is we're going to have to get really disgusted, just like an addict would be. They got to be disgusted with how their direction is going because of choices of their addiction over their own life sometimes. We are addicted to hierarchical ways of thinking, either thinking too low of ourselves or too high of ourselves. I mean, this whole concept just keeps stirring in the same circles. We keep going in the same cycles. And the way to break that cycle is if we, and I've talked to you about it before, Janet. I've talked to you about the agreement that if we make even if just the individual, if enough of us do, we're called to be making a decision that we can't just save the rich people and we can't just throw out, the planet. We have to care that every single person is taken care of no matter what, and all the species and the planet itself. If we don't come to that agreement, and I don't know what percentage of us need to, maybe it's a very small percentage of us need to think that way. If we keep arguing who deserves to live and who deserves to die based on money, that's really awful. Then as long as we're making, kind of fighting those battles, we're not really making that decision ourselves. And it might just be a decision within ourselves and then talk about it, maybe a decision within ourselves to the universe. I'm not sure. But I do know that we can't continue to assume that we're not in an interdependent set of circumstances no matter what you look at, whether it's the ecology of the planet or whether it's financial support or any of it. We are all interdependent on one another, and that's going to be the basis of us getting past this adolescent stage, I think, of civilization. And I had, like I said, 3 teenagers at home, so I can tell you what that's like. It's me, and enough ability to get in trouble without the ability to necessarily get yourself out of trouble, and kind of a kamikaze sort of way of, I'm going to go do this no matter what happens, kind of thing. That's kind of the zeitgeist of humanity right now that we got to mature out of. And I think we're having some consequences that are really good for that. Unfortunately, they're not always great during the time being, but maybe it rattles us. And that's we've all been sent to our rooms, as I said before, to think about what we've done.
We're all sent to our rooms, and we're about to go back to our rooms again. You reminded me that you were involved with A.R. Borden, and I don't think Deborah has any idea. Most of our listeners don't have any idea because A.R. has been mentioned for a while. Who is A.R. Borden?
Yeah.
What was that organization? And tell us about that, because you were involved with A.R. Borden, and he's either in hiding for the rest of his existence in another identity, or he's no longer with us and he's died. But we don't even know what happened to him. But go ahead. Explain what was his organization called, the Link Institute, how they were involved with extraterrestrials. Well, yeah, we have about half an hour, so do your best, but you don't have to cover every detail. But overall, and that might inspire us to think there is some kind of hope if this organization truly exists, which I believe exists, but I'm going to let you carry this for let's do another 15 minutes of that, and then we'll wrap it up. So go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I can be concise because I can jump in where I met him. And just to back up a little bit, A.R. Borden was a childhood abductee who remembered everything that happened to him when he was living in Brazil as a young person. I think he might have been 7 or 8, not sure. He bippity boppity boo became involved in there's an overt and covert everything, overt and covert science, there's overt covert government, there's overt and covert research, the whole thing. And because of his contact experiences, he ended up in covert science and covert military. And so he was involved in a number of different things going on, but the name of one of the organizations he was involved in was the Labyrinth Group, and another one was the ACIO. I was thinking about ACLU. Don't think of letters at the same time; it will mess you up. What happened was he saw kind of what was happening in the covert research of the question of aliens. Pretty much in those levels, there are aliens. They're talking to them, so it's not like is it or isn't it or something like that. It's far more advanced than we're being told. That's the covert end of it. And he kind of didn't like that humanity was never let in on the joke. We were never told anything. And he went rogue in that sense and went to go find a certain type of person. So the certain type of people that he went to go find were what they call natural gnosis, Gnosive, gnosis, to know, people who just know. They're clairvoyant, clairaudient, whatever, everything. And they're communicators with extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional entities. And he was trying to find what he considered the talent, but not necessarily the ones that were already ensconced in the government, being used by the government. And so what he did was he started writing articles for UFO Digest, and that's when I found him. Now, at the time, I was doing my journals of information from ET, and basically what happened was I started reading what he said in his articles in UFO Digest, and I went, oh, this sounds exactly like what it is I'm writing over here. So it was, I'd already been interested in ufology and all that, but this was somebody saying more exactly what it was that I was picking up, And so I wrote him, and that was kind of off to the races. And I subsequently made friends with a lot of people that used to follow who he was. But the key to it is that there is new information being brought into this merry-go-round thing that we hit. The article that interested me was topological thinking, and how that he felt that I got to make sure you guys are there because I've been having phone problems. Somebody there?
Yeah, we're here.
Okay,
Yeah, we're here.
Okay, so and this is still my abiding interest, is topological thinking. So humanity has the capacity to have a far more cohesive thinking within ourselves, cohesive thinking with each other, and the ability to understand information at a much higher level than we normally believe that we can. Okay, so a person who is using back up a little bit, he was saying in the article that the ETs who have had contact with humans wish that we had not so linear thinking. It's very hierarchically oriented, it's very linear, it's very literally nobody is thinking. They're kind of repeating whatever else they hear rather than much self-analysis or analysis from their own center, And so what the ETs were hoping is that it would be possible for humanity to dig into its roots as a species that are not, we were cavemen hitting each over the head with clubs all the time, but that story is a lot more complicated, and that what the human instrument is capable of. And if you find somebody who's aware that they're a no-civ, you've got somebody who has gone past a lot of belief system blockages that keep you from realizing that. And as a result, I and myself and some other people that had these abilities were interacting with AR, and then we got part of a forum they used before we had, Facebook, we had forums, and so we would learn from each other and talk about stuff, and learning about another thing that he had going on, which was called idiomaterial physics. And idiomaterial physics, if you want to put another name on it, is the quantum hologram type physics. So the idea that we're in a quantum hologram, and I actually used to study this in college, is if you have a construct, like I always talk about the ogre from the movie Shrek, Shrek the ogre.
Yeah.
And he's running through, right, and he's running through his forest. When you're depicting that, it is a mathematical construct. So Shrek, with all his movement and his size and all those things, are numbers, some kind of information. And then him running through a forest, the forest is numbers. So all you got to do is take the 0 point, or the very middle part of the equation there, and let's move it through, one reference point, move it through the environment, and that looks like he's running through the forest with, all the other code that comes with it. And so from that has come a philosophical idea that is what our experience is, that we're spiritual beings in a quantum hologramic construct. And a lot of that kind of explains all the weird stuff. So it explains, for instance, that what telepathy or telepathy is information transference between two objects that are in a construct, right? It explains locating
from the 0 point energy field, which you mentioned, by the way.
Huh?
Right? From the 0 point. Remember how you said the 0 point, the midpoint? That information is coming from the 0 point energy field in the quantum hologram.
Yeah, everything it derives from that.
Yeah,
right. You got it. And so, therefore we have a connection, a 0 point connection to where all that's coming from, which you could call source. But not only is it a supreme intelligence, but it's actually energy and information at the same time. And so that's the ideo part of idiomaterial physics. And material is then it renders itself into some kind of thing that looks like the material world around us. So idiomaterial. So that would mean every object you see, every person, every planet, every star, everything has an information base to it. And that a lot of the paranormal type things that people experience, even the weird things that UFOs do, can be explained by the fact that you're looking at a material object that has an underlying energy. So for instance, if you're a gnosis person, you can pick up on the energy signature of people. So you can have a sense of what kind of person they are. And we do this all the time, but we don't know we're doing it. So, for instance, you meet a new friend on social media, and you talk to them, and you may not know everything about them, and it's possible they could be fooling you, being somebody else. But generally speaking, you get a sense of who that person is, and that is because you're beginning to read the energy of that person. And the people talk about that, but I like the way that idiomaterial physics kind of pinned it down into some real mathematical stuff that I can sort of begin to understand just because I had enough math in college to be a computer science person, but there's a jumping off point, and some of the physicists in the group don't even think the rest of us should be there, but we're saying, look, okay, yeah, you can do the math, but can you feel the energy? See, so that's why A.R. Borden was doing that. Then he proceeded to give us a whole bunch of information from the groups that he was in about this kind of stuff, giving us articles that were written by the group and himself, and then we all kind of have that database stuff that we share. And if anyone wants to find out more, you can go to the writings of A.R. Borden on Facebook, and that group's still going.
Try this into the extraterrestrials. Because what I read was the meeting they had in, 2011, heading into 2012, and they had met. They left some notes, like a regular board meeting. But this is which extraterrestrial species were a part of this meeting. What they decided. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I wasn't part of it. I just read this stuff.
Stuff went on, but I was on a different track, so I wasn't in the original group. I was in one of the latter day groups, and I also had my own track. And A.R. Borden ostensibly passed away. They said he's passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2013. But everyone I know who knew him, at least the way I did, doesn't think that he passed, that something else was going on, and that he has been cited, actually physically cited by a couple of people in various situations. And so, but he had claimed to be going off and on world quite frequently, so he may not be on the planet, but he's around somewhere, or,
right.
Who knows? There's so many more places than we realize in this planet Earth.
Yeah. So what he was saying is that we have regular meetings with extraterrestrials. There are human members that meet with these extraterrestrials, and they're making major decisions for the Earth and these extraterrestrials based on their needs. And they are like a federation-type society. They had members from many different planets, and they had some of the Anunnaki. And so what happened was we were looking at a horrendous passing of Nibiru through the inner solar system, because we're a binary system, and when Nibiru comes, and Nibiru rotates around Nemesis, and Nibiru, that system has many moons and planets. I don't know what the numbers are, but it's just like Solaris, our sun, has many planets and moons. So they were on a negative path, intersecting with each other, was going to cause a lot of damage. And so AR's group that met decided to try experiment where the Earth would be blinked out of the time-space continuum, temporarily moved, like in seconds, to another location, and then just when it was the critical time, Nibiru would pass, and then we would be returned back into our orbit around the sun at a position where we were no longer in danger. And so everybody coming into 2012 says we're going to have a negative experience, and so they decided to circumvent that and make it a positive experience, and now we're out of danger. That's one thing I remember. What do you want to say about that? Is that how you remember it?
That was all different
article?
Groups. Yeah, that was all different groups. So the first group, when you were talking about that they were having meetings about what to do with the poor humans, I feel like that was probably a kind of a quasi-military elitist involvement with a group of people that probably were ET. But you need to know that not every ET group thinks the same way as other ET groups. And then the secondary group that you were talking about I was involved in that group where we were doing a joint. He had gotten a group of the people like us, and he was doing a joint intention process where we basically used intention, linked together intention, to try to advocate that humanity gets put into a different timeline, actually, kind of how I look at it, where it's less catastrophic than it was supposed to have been. But see, I've got my own track through all of that, so I don't know. Like, there's no, how would we know the efficacy of that except that he told us? And then during the time we were doing those meditations, after we finished those meditations, I was getting my own contact, and it told a different story. And so
what did your contact say happened? What did
your
contact say happened?
Let me clarify that the whole, it is a very diverse group, various numbers of groups that were involved with Airborne, and I had my own track that started before I met him and then continues after. That it just gets over into the concept of timelines, and Janet, I think you've got one of the best beads on that timeline thing of anyone I know, where we have 12, like you were showing, we have like 12 positive timelines of going into heaven on earth, and 12 timelines that go to basically hell on earth, and that we're individually and collectively working through timeline issues, and that sort of has made more sense to me than some of this other stuff, because of the fact that we also have now aberrations of timelines, because the Mandela effect, if anyone wants to look into the Mandela effect, people are having various experiences with, and it seems to come out in media, so like movies and, movies and books and things like that, but that's because that's a shared reality for us. The shared media is a shared reality that we all can kind of like compare, My general feeling is that we are being brought through a process, and I think it's been accelerated toward a more positive Star Trekian, not so much Star Warian future. But we're going to be kind of in combat, in a sense, or conflict from people who really would have, and I hate to say this, but there are really people that feel that they would benefit from most of us being dead or gone or destroyed, or they want, they kind of want to start all over again with the new human species being some form of iteration of their wonderfulness, and the rest of us can go hang. Whereas on the other end of that scale is somebody that thinks, all the diversity and everything that is unfolding exactly the way it should be, but it is being interfered with by very, basically death cult type mentality. So when you have people,
the skulls everywhere. What is this skull thing? Like worshiping skulls? Is death culture on mugs, on clothing?
I don't know. To me, it's like, I don't know. There's ancient indigenous belief about skulls and all those kinds of things that I won't get into because they have a different viewpoint of it. Whereas people might look at life and death as a natural process. I'm talking about where they just kind of want to, have a scorched earth policy and rebuild with their perfection of what they think utopia would be. And anytime that you have a utopia, like somebody's gonna say what their idea of utopia is, but someone has to die to get there, it's got a problem. Like those guys over there on that side of the aisle have to, they should just go drop in the sea. And I know that, sometimes you get mad and feel that way sometimes, but it's important to kind of keep the long view and keep the compassionate view, even of people you don't agree with, just because, I don't want them to be in power, but I don't necessarily want them to all die. It's going to feel differently about that. I just think people who are psychopathic, you're going to always get the same result. You're going to always get harm, and you're going to get deprivation, and you're going to get trauma. So I think, would you let someone out of a sanitarium go, fly a jumbo jet, Are you going to let someone who, is not, right kind of temperament and the right kind of pilot seat, I would say. But, so it's important that we're going to be frustrated in this process, but I definitely see an acceleration from the time that I started writing down kind of what they were telling me was going to happen. And now, which didn't make any sense back then, but it does make sense now, and they were talking about the order of the day, more or less, is that our species, kicking and screaming and otherwise, gets brought along together intact towards a more beneficial future, and that there's some other votes in this. It's not just totally up to humans. It's also up to nature. Nature has a definite set of mechanisms in there that are very, very old baseline reality programming of nature. I'm sorry to say that a germ is nature. Whether you accelerate it and make it more deadly or not, it still has to follow along the rules of nature, including us being smart enough to figure out a way to not participate with it, like a COVID type of thing. And also, nature has a way of being kind of indiscriminate about our politics or religion. It really doesn't care, So you got to keep that in mind, that opportunistic viruses are ecumenical and non-political. So, yeah, bipartisan and ecumenical, yeah. No matter what you think or what you believe, you still have a human body that's subject to the natural forces, and these kinds of things happen on a regular basis for a very long time. So the thing is that we also are suffering from the consequences of allowing this uber alles kinds of groups from running everything, and as a result depleting the capacity and the resiliency of everyone else in the collective. And we simply can't afford to let them do that, but we have. So now we're going to have the results of that until the circumstances go to their conclusion, and you kind of see back in lately. I'm so pleasant. My reading is so pleasant. The Black Death and all the other plagues in Europe and everything else. Just to kind of see how humanity kind of responds to it. And at the beginning of the Black Death, of course, in Europe, they had a lot of the Catholics were telling everyone how to take care of this against former information from indigenous populations in various areas. And they were giving the wrong advice, including that they didn't even take the caretakers that were on the ground taking care of people started separating the sick from the well, and they got in trouble from the church because they were doing that. Because that you kind of learn things by doing, and unfortunately, this is trial by fire, learning by doing. Response to something like this, we're just going to simply end up doing the same kinds of things during the Spanish flu and all the other things. So we're going to get there anyway. Now, no matter how you feel about it, politically or however, religiously or whatever, we're going to have the same thing happen here. At some point, the government is built of the people, by the people, for the people, whether the leadership recognizes that or not. And if the government or the responding body of politics does not respond to the situation at hand, then that will get changed one way or the other. And I think it's just going to have to be, because are we going to really let 30 million people get kicked out of their homes? Are we really going to let that? Are we really going to do that? I try not to be that cynical. But, we don't have the mechanisms in place at the moment, but we're going to have to, no matter what your political ideology is or theory. You got to be a human, or you don't have any real power at that point. If you really prove out that you're a completely inhumane person, then you will be bypassed one way or the other. So that's my
let's ask Debra to feedback on that. Do you have any questions for Karen about what she was involved with?
No.
Or any questions you have at all for anybody?
I don't have any questions. I just have a statement. I think it's a very positive outlook, which I appreciate in such dark times, right? But one of the things I've learned, as long as there's love on this planet, there's hope, right? Wherever there's love, there's hope. And I think you're seeing a generation of people that are very different than the ones before them. And I think in the protests that were going on in this country, one of the things you saw was a lot of young people, right? And people from all walks of life. When those Black Lives Matter protests were going on, it wasn't just black people out there. There was everybody out there from every walk of life. It didn't matter. And so I think what you're seeing with our current government is they represent a minority of people in this country. They do not represent the majority. And like Karen said, It's an old ideology that's dying, but refuses to change with the world. The world is changing and evolving. And I think we're being taken to a better place. You know, everybody talks about how horrible this world is, but when you look at how things were just 100 or 200 years ago, it's much better than it was back then, right? Think about how people were treated during the Crusades. If you didn't believe in the Roman Catholic God, they killed you. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? What did they do to people who were the Gnostics, the witches, right? And they were women. And I think you find that women are often much more intuitive than men, much more empathic. Not to say that there aren't men out there with gifts. There are. But, you know, they couldn't control them. They couldn't control their thoughts. So what did they do? They killed them. And I think it's a very patriarchal mentality that probably did come from the Anunnaki. Has been constantly handled down. This world is out of balance. When you look at Native beliefs, they will tell you all this chaos in this world is being created because we're out of balance. Paternalistic ways of thought are not good for anybody except the men, except the white men. They do a disservice to everyone else on this planet. And so there has to be a balance between paternal and maternal. And when women were pushed aside is when this world became out of balance. And until we're elevated until an equal level, this world will never come back into balance.
The one thing about A.R. Borden is that Karen... Wait, hold on. Don't put that here, honey. One thing about A.R. Borden is that they will talk about the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki had a council of 12, which was equal men to women. There were 6 men and 6 women. And in the notes it said that they still had a council of 12 with a balance, 6 men and 6 women. And A.R. Borden thing. So I thought that one of the problems that we have in the United States is that we have this executive branch. And if you think about it, back when our founding fathers gathered to create a system, you know, the dominant type of governance system in the planet was a monarchy. So they're basically calling it a different name, a president. But it's, you know, our leader that has this much power is still a king. And that's what we see with Trump, and he's saying, there's a bunch of YouTubes, I invite you to go look at it, but I found one, and it says, Trump is suggesting delaying the election. I'm going to follow up on this thread after the show, but can Trump just declare that the elections are delayed? What can he do to delay the elections? It looks like he's sending troops out to declare martial law. I think there is some kind of
national emergency.
National emergency. We can't have the election. It looks like he's going to lose the election because he's so far down. He's so unpopular because of his whatever, his stupidity, his dictatorial attitudes, his sociopathy. He's down, down, down. So, yeah. So let's pass that around for the remaining 10 minutes or so. Are we going to have the elections? Or not? What do you guys think? What do you ladies think?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
I do think
Which
so.
one's saying
We've
yes?
had them. Yeah, I think we're going to have it because we had it during other times of, you know, depression and everything else. It's too much of a part of how this country runs. The question is, what kind of leadership are we going to begin to foster within any of the two parties, and are there ways to kind of make it a more homogenized, reflective of who people are, kind of electoral process? You know, because right now it's not. It's punishing to many aspects of society. So I don't know. We've got to continue that process of making being able to vote and then making our votes count towards what our intentions are. The imbalance in the Anunnaki, even though they had that council, by the way, was the top to the bottom. They thought in themselves, first of all, when they gotten involved in human affairs, we were their project, we were their pets, we were their servants. We were not going to have any kind of autonomy whatsoever. And so that's one of the problem areas is a lot of the people in the elite areas, the 1%, I guess you could say, really don't think that the average person has the intellect, ability of any kind to be even self-determining, because they have knocked us back that far in terms of keeping us from having self-autonomy of any kind. And so, they kind of control the purse strings at this point, especially with wealth inequality having, gone off the charts. And so one of the things that this kind of season shows is that, okay, they have the ability and they have the power to improve the situation and save the day, in a sense, right? And they don't want to do it. Okay, so, they don't have that will. We do vote energetically, too, by the way, by what we pay attention to and what we support and what our intentions are ourselves. The legitimacy of the king would keep the crown on his head and keep his head if he made sure the people had bread. And one of the reasons why they chopped the heads off of the French king and queen is that they said, let them eat cake, when they didn't even have the flour for bread. And I thought about that on many occasions along the watching how the elite speak to what's going on with humans. Just pick something else. Ivanka Trump, if you lost your job, just go do something else. And I'm like, go have some cake. So I think it's very kind of like turbulent, like water's turbulent, very churning. It's hard to tell what's going on, but I try to look for and see glimmers of how we could come out on the other side of this thing with a lot of clarity about who human beings are and what our potential could be if we embrace all of it. We got to embrace all of us and all our talents, all our abilities, all our perspectives are valid. If we don't get there, then we'll just continue to be bullied, basically. But the bullying still has to do a bottom line. The leadership still has to do a bottom line that they're not even doing right now. So it's coming to a threatening time for them, as well as for the rest of us. So it's a hard times, man. It's hard times. But
what do you mean threatening? What do you mean by that? How is it a threatening time for them?
Oh, because their legitimacy is called into question. People legitimately ask, how come Jeff Bezos has more money than to where, like, if somebody else with a $30,000 a year job, it would take them $1 million years to get the same amount. How come it is that we, no matter what decision gets made, we always end up worse off? I mean, this is very revelatory and stuff that if you try to point these things out, let's say before 2008, and especially now in this time of COVID, about what this leadership is doing. I tell you what they're not. We know about what they're not doing is what they're doing. What they're not doing is making sure we're okay. What they're not doing is making sure we have health care, making sure we don't have literally food, okay? Making sure we don't have a place to live. I mean, food. As long as they get that basic stuff, they had something to argue about with. But they don't have any bargaining chips, right?
That's what doesn't make sense. It's like, we have been slaves all along, but you keep the slaves happy so they don't realize they're slaves. What has changed that they don't give a damn if we realize we're slaves and we start rebelling? So something has changed, and I don't know what it is. They don't care about us to the point that they don't care if a majority of us are out in the street and starving. Now, they haven't kicked us out yet, but this thing, we have another day, and the evictions are gone. And we have another day, and the $600 a week extra, which has been carrying this economy, because our job is to be purchasers, and we can't be workers, and we're out there buying stuff, and that sustains the economy. But we're all about to lose that job. Tomorrow will be the last day, and people will be getting eviction notices, and it will be the last day. So, anyway, we're running out of time. One final, we'll wrap it up, Karen, and then we'll talk to Deborah and then out the door. Go ahead.
I'll just say real quick that I don't believe in disaster or anything, and that would make me kind of different from A.R. Borden and some people, is I don't think that we're doomed. But they think we're doomed. They think they're just going to let us die off. It doesn't matter if we take up all our assets. We're all going to die off anyway, and they're going to start the new heaven and the new earth. At some point, I'd like to elaborate why I don't believe that that's true. And they're getting caught with the fact that we didn't get whacked with Nibiru. Okay, now what? Now what do they got to try to do?
Yeah.
So what if that never happens? Well, I think it's a big joke on them, honestly.
Well, let's go into that next week. That'll be a promise. Write that down as one of your talking points next week.
Okay.
And we will continue with that. Okay. Anything else you want to say? I'm going to pass the talking stick to Deborah. So. Is that it? That's our cliffhanger.
Well, I'll say this. I'll just say that. Pick the hopeful. Pick the hopeful until maybe the hopeful isn't. You got to pick a different hopeful. That's my philosophy, and I've run with it years.
I like that. Okay, Deborah. Final words to you.
I'm with her. You got to try and be positive and find the good in the situation, because it's not all completely bleak, right? You got to get outside of the fear cycle. And I think the fear cycle is being perpetuated by the God spell, right? So, and I think part of what's going on now is you've got white Christian conservatives that this is the world, the reality they've created, but it's completely disconnected from what's really going on, right? And they everything about the Republican platform is a violation of biblical law, which I find completely hypocritical. And I do not understand, right? When you look at their platform, it completely violates everything they believe in. And they cannot.
But they don't really believe it. That's just their doctrine. That's not what they believe. They're doing what they believe, which is that they're superior. But that's not. They're just espousing that, and they're saying the words, but they don't believe it. Or this is a different reality.
That's why I avoid people that go to church, because they're usually the hypocritical, judgmental ones, and those are the ones you want to stay away from. And, I've found community and people in the non-secular, right? And I think there was a time in this country when most people were under some type of religious belief, but I think it's something, as high as 65% of the population no longer follows any type of religion.
Wow.
We're
out of time, so we'll pick up that. So mark that down as our talking point. We're going to talk about religion and the hypocrisy of religion, so that can take a good half an hour of our show next week. And final word, Deborah, because we are running out of time.
Random acts of kindness. Just be kind to everyone around you.
Yes. Is it kind? Is it loving? No, don't do it. Change course. Do something kind, loving. And whenever you do something kind and loving for someone else, you do it for yourself, and so on and so forth. I want to thank everybody for joining us. This has been another episode of Elephants in Our Room with Janet Lessin, Debra DeFranco, and Karen Christine Patrick. And we'll be back again next week, same time. Same channel, same bat channel, 2 p.m. Hawaii, 8 p.m. Eastern, and everything in between. So much love and blessings, and this is Planet of Peace by Jaiya Earthchild.
Shared the air since the dawn of time. No one takes a breath saying this one's mine. We share the sun, we share the heat. It's time to learn to share the land in peace. You who govern, choose to spend more on war than we can comprehend. We insist to share our wealth, food and water, homes and health, teachers, trees and medicine. Then the time of true peace can begin. We are all one human family, sharing one home. Our home is a planet of peace, planet of peace, planet of peace. You of every nation are family to me. I feel such constellation that you suffer while I walk free. I will do all that I can to help unite this family of woman, child, and man. The leaders of our nation, are they wise as well as strong, or boys in imitation, pointing that he's gone, threatening the future, endangering us all? The people